We've got we've got a lot on our agenda, so I'm going to go ahead and call this joint school board assembly meeting to order. It is December 6, 2019. It's Friday, and at this time, and also if you're looking for internet connection, it's ASD internet only, if you need that. And the password's level. Okay, great. Okay. So if we could have roll call.
President Marset,
Here.
Vice President Hildy, Ms. Bellamy,
Here.
Mr. Donnelly, Mr. Holloman, Ms. Mitchell, and Ms. Vacalis. And President Marset, Ms. Mitchell is on her way.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Chair Rivera. Present. Vice Chair LaFrance. Here. Mr. Constant. Here. Mr. Dunbar. Here. Mr. Dyson. Here. Ms. Kennedy. Here. Mr. Perez Verdilla. Here. Mr. Peterson. Present. Ms. Quinn Davidson. Here. Mr. Weddleton. Here. Ms. Zalatel.
Okay, thank you. And at this time, we'll do the flag salute. How about Mr. Peterson? Would you lead us? Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And I just want to acknowledge that we are on Denina land and very appreciative. So we do have, okay, thank you. Dina Mitchell is online. Thank you, Dina, for joining us. At this, oh, that sounds like me. Okay, no problem. So at this time, we have minutes from the previous joint meeting. Okay, move to approve. Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Mayor Berkowitz, would you like to come up here? You can sit next to me if you like. And then it's time, we have approval of agenda. Is there any, we need to vote on the minutes, yeah, okay. If we could vote then. How are we going to do that? Okay, okay. So no dissension, no changes, the minutes are approved by non-dissent or whatever, but they're approved. Approval agenda, is there any change to the agenda? Yes, Ms. Crystal.
Thank you. I was wondering if we could add to the agenda a conversation about designated emergency facilities.
Okay. And Mr. Constance? Okay. Okay. Yes, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, I'd like to see some brief report on how the school district is doing on coming up with ideas for the revised city seal.
Okay. And Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you. Could we add an agenda item regarding tobacco 21 and the school district policy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. So we have those items added to the agenda. Is there any other items or changes to the agenda? Is there any dissension with the agenda? Ms. Hildy? Well, we'll do what we can. Okay. We'll answer those questions through email. Correct? We can answer those? Yeah, okay. So the agenda is approved. So we do have something that the district would like to share that is good news. Dr. Bishop?
One of the things we do in our meetings is share, we start with good things and good news, and the board has a small trinket for each of you to wear to your high school in your area. They're going to get those to you now, but it's just a small thank you for your service. Very small, it meets the whole code, it's very cheap, like I said. And just wanted to share with the assembly, it isn't out public yet, but the board had word in regard to our graduation rates, which are 84% this year, up from 80% last year. So we are moving in the right direction, and that's a major accomplishment for the teachers, staff, kids, families in our district. We're getting closer and closer to Destination 2020.
And then our 5-year, oh, nice, I love it. I love it. We need pictures. So the other thing I want to share is that our 5-year graduation is now at 88%. So that, and it came up from, what was it last year? Do you remember? I don't know, but it came up quite a bit. So I think it was 84 maybe. But so that's impressive too, that our kids that are staying with us another year actually have a higher graduation rate. So absolutely wonderful. All right, so the next thing we have is our financial planning, and it's our ASD Performa, and we have Jim Anderson and Andy Ratcliffe, thank you, with us to help us present that.
Yep.
Dr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam President. And we actually have the Performa to pass out. We actually have the memorandum for which the board considered on Tuesday. We are sharing, just the major overview, and again, our Performa is based on, just wanted to remind folks in regard to our projection out is very difficult to do based on the assumptions that we have to make in regard to, as you know, school funding is usually the last, those of you who spent time in Juneau especially know, it's the last thing considered in the legislative process generally, and so this is based on the known facts as we have them. Mr. Anderson.
Good morning. I'm Jim Anderson, the CFO for the district. What is being handed out in front of you contains 3 parts. The first is the main memo. It's 3 pages, followed by a more in-depth analysis that Andy will talk through. And then at the very end is a 1-page sheet that just shows a potential 6-year projection based off flat revenue for 6 years, basically state law as we see it today. The first memo, the first 3 pages, and you'll see at the bottom of the first page at table 1, really is our projected upper limit for next year. And as you look at table 1, you'll see in the comparison between the budget for this year, FY 19-20, and the pro forma 2021, there's a decrease in overall upper limit by about $106 million. Although Andy will go more in depth on both revenue and expenses. The main assumptions that caused that, one is over $80 million in grants that were added to our budget last year, but didn't actually come to fruition during the legislative cycle. So because it wasn't raised, we are assuming at this point that won't be part of our revenue, although it certainly could be added as an ask later on in the budget process. Also, House Bill 287 expired this year. That was that money outside the state formula. There's currently no legislation showing that we would get that next year, but as Dr. Bishop said, we're preceding the beginning of the legislative session, so tough to predict. Also, a continued reduction of about 300 students is projected for next year. Everything we've seen from AEDC and others is showing that Anchorage has nearly leveled out on the recession. So still a decline, just not as much as this year. So this memo, again, is just really, the first 3 pages is talking about a projected upper limit, which the board approves to start the budgeting process. And I'll hand off to Andy as he talks through the appendix and gives you a brief overview of how we got there.
Thank you. Again, my name is Andy Ratliff. I'm the Director of the Office of Management and Budget for the district. We'll be walking through the appendix. It's the larger document, and in the interest of time, I know you guys are busy. We're going to jump around to some pages and see some salient points that we really want you guys to be aware of. The first, if you want to turn to page 5, there's a chart there that shows what our revenue changes are going to be. The biggest ones are, you'll see an increase in property taxes. This is predominantly due to the increase in property values at the district level that increases the required local contribution from the state. So as that required local contribution increases, the state's contribution decreases by a dollar for dollar amount. And that was about 1.6 million or so of the total increase. And then we lost a little bit of local money based on our operating funds outside the BSA going down, that 8.4 million that you see under state revenue. So that's kind of the net of that effect, and we'll have a little bit of an increase in foundation funding, predominantly as we have seen continued growth in our intensive needs students. It's partially offset by the loss in regular ADM, but since the intensive needs is growing, so it's outpacing the value of the regular ADM. The 8.4 million, that's the one-time money that was in HB 278 that is currently scheduled to be paid out this year, but under state review or legal review between the legislature and the executive branch. We do not anticipate any use in fund balance for the purposes of this discussion. We may add that later on as fund balance becomes apparent. We can use some of our savings to offset some losses later on. But for the purposes of saying here's how much revenue versus here's how much projected expense we have, we don't use that. We don't put a use of fund balance in this version of our budget. Is there any questions on revenue as we go through? Those are just the really high points of it. So, if not, we can turn to page 9. Page 9 shows our salaries, wages, other payroll outlay, and benefits. Our aggregate increase is about 1.8%, a little lower than what's projected for inflation. This does include increase in personnel. We anticipate losing about 13 or so classroom teachers purely due to enrollment. We've projected about 23 AD or FTE increase for special education due to the increase in intensive needs students, and then a couple of admin positions that we need for compliance reasons in line with our apprentice policy. So that's our salary and benefits packages, not expected to increase a lot. And we've turned to page 11. This will show our revenue and our total expenditures and a budget gap of about 19.6 million. Some of our other expenditure drivers that are increasing utilities. We're expecting garbage and heat to go up by about 5% and electric to go up by about 3.5%. Keep in mind that these are pretty hard for us to project as the rates projections don't always come through. The RCA has to approve them. There's some other big things out there. The Swan Lake fire that damaged the power lines. They may change the rates to account for some of that capital cost that needs refreshed. The other one is our rent on this building is going to go up by about 11% as our base rate is, there's an increase in our contract. Every 5 years our base rate goes up by a set amount that was negotiated back in 2005. And then in between those years, there's an increase for inflation. And I believe I misspoke when I told the board last time that that's on the entirety of the rent, but it's not. It's only on a select portion for operations and maintenance. So we have about, I think, 35% or so that is considered operations and maintenance costs in this facility that is tied to inflationary increases. So it's not the whole amount. I just want to make sure that that was clarified for our board anyway. The other big one is our liability insurance is going up by about 40% over the last year's budget. About 30% of that was experienced in the current year budget. just kind of unexpectedly. We didn't have it in the FY20 adopted budget, but we allocated some money towards the increase. The liability insurance increases are predominantly due to nationwide trends of traumatic brain injury and sexual abuse claims that have districts all across the country kind of scrambling to cover these increases. So that puts our total gap at about 19.6 million. In terms of FTE, that's between 210 and 220 FTE based on average salary and benefit packages. That's our general fund. Transportation is on page 13. The chart that shows our revenue for transportation. Our costs are pretty well increasing in line with inflation. As you might know, our bus driver contract is tied to the minimum wage. So as the minimum wage increases, our bus drivers are paid at least twice the minimum wage. And that's a state statute. So that increase kicks in, and every January we see the inflationary adjustments to that. Our Reliant contract is also tied to inflationary increases every year, and they service about 2/3 of our bus routes. So the total increase is about 2.7%, or a little under 700,000. We anticipate, just like we did this year, asking for property taxes to make up that balance to continue providing services. That way, if we do have some fund balance remaining in that fund, it'll be used for the purposes of offsetting taxes in there. So if we have some transportation fund balance, we will use it for that purpose. The only other one that I really going to see salient to this conversation is our debt service fund. While the expenses aren't expected to go up, our tax request is expected to go up by about $16.5 million to account for the vetoes from Governor Dunleavy. They vetoed $20.5 million of funding to us. We have about $4 million in fund balance for debt service that we can use to offset that $20 million cut. Is there anything you guys would like to add?
Yes, Mr. Dyson.
Are any of the lawsuits that you mentioned coming from the unfortunate hazing thing that happened at Diamond a few years ago?
Through the president, to member Dyson, this is a national trend, and we'd have to take a look at specifically with our risk manager, but this is not unique to Anchorage School District. So, but we can share if there was a delta due to any instances locally, but it wouldn't even hit our insurance, that issue. But it's a national trend. Additionally, in that mix is also school shootings.
So thank you. Are there any lawsuits coming out of that incident?
Yes. We settled one, and one is on the way to be settled.
Get offline, I think that's helpful.
Sure. But it was well under insurance.
Mr. Rivera and then Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam President. On the theme of lawsuits, I was curious if any of the lawsuits currently in litigation regarding state funding and allocation have been considered by the school district.
Through the board president, we know that the Supreme Court gets initial hearings on the forward funding, and I believe it's 9 January. The pro forma is focused on next year's budget. So really that legal action is for $10.8 million roughly that we have budgeted for this year as part of the forward funding that needs to be settled at the Supreme Court level. But there's no current lawsuits I'm aware of that would impact our ability to project next year's, just a lack of long-term legislative or state funding. I mean, really, I think our largest challenge, and I think not uncommon to the muni or any government agency, is single-year budgeting versus multi-year confidence as to what we're going to receive. So this is built on the fact that we go back to state law Regardless of what comes out on 13 December, we will go with current statute for building the budget, because a lot of actions will occur, as we've seen in the past, all the way up through August for next year's funding. So we'll stick with today's statutes for the purpose of this projection.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam President. I was wondering about the traumatic brain injury lawsuits. Is that related to competitive athletics or slip and falls, or why is that a trend nationwide? Thank you.
Through the president to Member Peterson, yes, it is in regard to student injuries in schools due to brain injury. And we, just to add a little note, we saw this coming down, and when it goes from the NFL to college, we kind of foresaw this. So actually, a couple years ago, we invested fund balance for all of our football teams to have new helmets. They are refurbished on a schedule, but what had happened over time was different pieces were put on, like a Rydell and a different brand. And so for the largest kids, the varsity, the hardest hitters, we replaced helmets 2 years ago. Is that correct? Yes. And then we have a schedule to assess them. In addition, we're working with soccer. Girls soccer is the next nationally that is affected. So, yeah. Oh, and then ASA put through a voluntary, which is the sports association, and we participate in it, that I believe it's only twice a week hitting. It's padless practice or whatever. So they don't hit every day.
Any other questions or comments on financials? All right, then we're going to move right into ASD bond proposal. And we have Mr. Tom Roth, and I'll let him introduce himself, and Mr. Michaelis.
Thank you, Madam President. My name's Tom Roth. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. So for the next couple minutes, I'd just like to introduce the Anchorage School Bond Proposition for 2020. This will come to the Assembly for first read on the 17th of December, and for action on the first meeting in January. So the 2020 school bond proposal is for a total amount of $82,833,000. And I'll briefly review the projects. I just want to highlight a couple of points prior to that. So if you look at the total amount of this proposition that is specific to earthquake damage repair, it's about $42.2 million, and the significance of that is that amount is eligible for potential federal or state reimbursement. Also, the question we always field is, what's the property tax impact? In an absolute, and this is always kind of a difficult one to capture, but in an absolute sense, if you were to sell all of this authority at one time at a 4% interest rate, I believe, the impact is $18.45 to a $100,000 property assessed value. What this doesn't factor in is debt retirement. In this period, and just very briefly, this amount, if passed, the recommendation going forward, and this is not to preempt the board's prerogative, but the recommendation is that if passed, that the district would not come back in 2021 for a capital improvement bond. So if you look at the total amount of this bond package against what would be retired in a 2-year period, we are anticipating retiring about $111 million over that time frame. So the actual bond amount is significantly less than what the district would retire in that 2-year period. So I'll pause if anybody has any questions before moving into the projects.
Ms. Hildy?
Just to clarify, we did talk about doing a 2-year bond this year, but until we revise our 6-year capital plan, the board hasn't said we're not going to bond next year. We had discussed a lot of different things, but I don't want you to leave here thinking that's not going to happen next year until we've really finalized that, because we have a lot of deferred maintenance.
Mr. Constance?
Thank you. So then what's the answer to the timeline of the question of when that gets revised? Because it's a hard pill to swallow that we're going to have a massive bond with the suggestion that we might not have a bond next year and then come back and have to have that conversation later. So what's the timeline?
We don't have that on our agenda, but I think it is important to put that on there as soon as possible. So we'll try to put it on for our meeting on the 17th if we can. Ms. Hildy?
I'd just like to clarify it, that, massive bond is maybe not the word I would use, but something that addresses a real need that happened in our community, the earthquake, independent of our ongoing deferred maintenance. So when we talk about the bond and why we have a large bond, it's because there was a real earthquake that happened in addition to our ongoing needs to sustain our capital.
And if I might just add to clarify to Member Hildy's comment. So we do have a somewhat parallel process where we also are developing a 6-year capital plan, which is approved by the board. Again, that really will be the determinant when the board is, I guess, committed to an action on the long-range plan. But again, this is what the administration has recommended to the school board.
Quick last note. I'm not one who's often well taken to having my words sent back to me and reframed. And so I appreciate that's your perspective and I have mine. Thank you.
Ms. LaFrance and then the mayor.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a quick clarification. It's the 42.5 million that's available or will likely be reimbursed by FEMA, but the amount above for 26.926 million is not.
So through the board president to Member LaFrance. So again, within the earthquake recovery, what we are eligible to seek for reimbursement are those damages that are specifically a result from the earthquake, and anything that the district would do over and above that earthquake repair would not be eligible. So I just want to clarify that eligibility does not necessarily equate to actual recovery or seeking those funds, because at some point, based on the category, we also would incur a obtain and maintain earthquake insurance requirement for that amount that is sought from the federal government, and that could potentially be a business decision, based on the understanding that it's in perpetuity, that you would be paying that.
Thank you.
Mayor Berkowitz?
I'm just curious, where's the district's plan for energy efficiency and energy self-sufficiency? And how's that wrapped into your capital plan?
Through the president. So if I might just very briefly, what you won't see is a specific entry on this for efficiency, but I would tell you for every project that the district does that involves any type of improvement to school buildings or facilities, we are replacing all lighting to LED. We are increasing the RE factor. So in effect, the buildings are retaining heat better. Window replacements, refurbishing to schools. So that is inherent within the projects that we do.
And roofs?
And roofs is a part of that. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam President. So I think one of the things that I want to be clear on the record about, and might be leading to some of the questions that Assembly members have heard, and I want to legitimize them, is that there are some serious concerns that we are hearing from community members regarding this bond proposal. And I would imagine that school board members obviously know what those concerns are. So I want to make sure that this is a venue for us to air those concerns and not have sort of negative back and forth. And then second, to that effect, I also want to be transparent in saying that several Assembly members have asked about what our ability is to change the bonds or, to that effect, remand the bonds back if we don't like them. And then third, also want to ask in this process, Has the school board considered splitting up some of the bond packages into two different bond packages? Sort of one with all of the possible federal reimbursable ones, and then the other, the non-federal reimbursable ones, if that was something that you considered.
So just to answer that question, we did have a motion to separate out the bonds. It did not pass through the vote. So what passed is what you see before us. There were several amendments to our bond, and what you see is what is passed. The other question I would ask, when you talk about concerns about the bond, do you want to be more specific with that?
I think some of the members will probably bring some things up.
Okay. So, Mr. Forrest.
Thank you, President Marset. No, that's what my students in the Peace Corps used to call me, so I appreciate it. Yeah, so I apologize, Mr. Roth, if you would already kind of explain this and I'm still not quite understanding it. So, following off what Vice Chair LaFrance had asked, so on this bond, it looks like there are about, if I'm doing my math right, about $68 or $69 million in what could be thought of as attributable to the earthquake. Obviously, the biggest chunk being the Graining Middle School, but then the other, where above that it says earthquake recovery projects, almost $27 million. So I know it's hard to know exactly what FEMA is going to do, but when we're speaking with our constituents and they say, okay, what of that $68 million, how much do we think we can or will recover back from FEMA?
Right.
What should we say to them?
Through the president to member Dunbar. So, you know, with regards to the amount, you know, the 42.2 million I cited, if you look at the handouts, and I think you should have this matrix provided. So if you look at the earthquake recovery project specifically, those amounts were derived through engineer assessments of those buildings in the aftermath of the earthquake, and those are just earthquake recovery projects. And I've got a list. I'd be happy to go through and detail what those are. If you look on the other page, you see Greening Middle School and Eagle River Elementary School. So I'll focus on Greening, the 39.3 or 39.3 million. 10.7 million of that amount is specific to earthquake repair damage, or earthquake damage repair, excuse me. The remainder of that, what the administration did based on board guidance and an ad hoc committee process that happened earlier this year. In addition to the earthquake repairs to both Eagle River and Greening, it was the recommendation of the ad hoc committees that we also improve the seismic performance of those buildings, that we would increase the resilience in the next event. So the second layer, the second tier of cost additive for those schools was to increase the seismic performance. And then as a part of that, Eagle River already had a roof that was approved in the previous bond that was going to go forward. But we had also recommended that we replace the roof on Greening as a part of that second tier, and the school board did approve that. And what we did from that point is we have gone to design for both of these schools, and we are well along in that process. So there is a third tier, if you will, for these two schools, and the administration recommended to the superintendent and to the school board that we do these things. And the reason being, if you know Eagle River and Greening specifically, it's been on the 6-year plan for a long time. It's 85 construction. It's original construction that we had recommended if we were going to be in the school building doing some of these major repairs, that we would do some other things to address what were really kind of aged out systems in those schools. In addition to Greening, there are some things that really are kind of tied to the earthquake based on observations of some things that failed in the building. As an example, there's this concrete veneer that even though the structure worked as planned, as designed, we had this concrete veneer that peeled off in a lot of cases, and you've seen some of the pictures. You'll see what I'm describing. We want to replace that. We want that to be gone. That's part of this third tier. Greening has multiple entryways into the front of the building. We're proposing as a part of this that we go to a single entryway into the building that's managed by the office. That's another example. For safety and security. Greening, if you've been in the parking lot during drop-off or pickup, it is chaos. And what we're proposing as a part of this, again, from a safety perspective, would be to redirect the bus traffic away from student population, kids and cars. So these are some of the things that are in this third tier, plus paint, LED lighting from an energy efficiency standpoint. So that's the third tier of cost to greening. And Eagle River had some other things that were somewhat similar in terms of efficiencies. So what we recommended to the board was approved, and that's what you see on the bond proposition.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that? President
Very
Morissette?
quickly, we got a line here.
Well, because I don't think you quite answered my question. So you said $26.9 million, that is all recoverable, because that, you said, is directly attributed.
42.2 million recoverable, eligible
Okay.
for recovery.
So I got it. So I got it. So 26.9 plus 10.7 million of the graining, plus some other percentage of Eagle River.
No, the 10.7 I've factored into that
Right, and
42.2
so that
million.
totals
Yes.
to 42 million. So, okay. All right.
Okay. Mrs. Quinn Davidson?
Thank you, President Marset. So what was the total package last year? 74. So it's gone up a bit, but not actually more earthquake addition than what it went up.
Let's get the exact number, actually.
What's the number, please? Just sound off.
Okay.
59, sorry.
So that change is essentially attributable to the earthquake? I mean, there's a little bit more, so we're losing other updates we would have done because we're doing earthquake updates.
Through the president, yes.
And that's okay. We've come to an amount that we realize is doable because we can't push it higher. Okay. I just want to ask a question about Aquarian, which is in my district. So that 6.8 million, is that, I know there were a lot of requests for different parts of improvements that could be done there. And then I see that the cumulative is 10 million. Can you just talk a little bit about what was approved, what was asked for, and what the long-term plan is?
Through the president.
Thank you.
Very, very briefly. So the school board did approve an amount of 6.8 million, and our intent is to deliver 6.8 million in capital improvements. And there is a reconcile requirement here, in that the numbers that we received from Aquarian were based on planning factors that they used, not necessarily consistent with those that the district is required to comply with in terms of the deed numbers. And what happens is, these are estimates, and these estimates get more refined as you go through the design process, and ultimately the number you get is what a contractor will bid. But this is what we think is going to happen. And I think it's consistent with what the charter schools recommended. So the roof will be replaced. We're gonna replace heaters. We're gonna replace a boiler. There's a single boiler, multiple cabinet unit heaters in all the classrooms. Those will get replaced. We need to improve the ventilation. The airflow in that school is not acceptable. The exterior envelope, all the siding will be replaced, vapor barrier, et cetera, to make it less susceptible to water intrusion. Electrical and plumbing upgrades, and then some significant refurbishment within the interior of the building. So we think that's within the realm of feasible. Yes, sir. The roof, we have to go through a pretty significant design process for the roof. For the ceilings, yes, sir, to be sure that the ceiling tiles, light fixtures are secured.
Can I just quickly follow up? I think Mr. Dyson's volunteering to help with the roof, so you should talk with him about that. But, so the 10 million is additional changes that would come in the next bond package, that 3 million, or when would that arrive?
Yeah.
On the chart, though, that 10 million is that column, one cumulative total, that is not what Aquarian's total project cost is.
Okay.
That's just the bond accumulation as it goes down.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
And again, not,
Thank you.
and I don't want to beat
Thanks a lot,
this
though.
too hard, but as an example, the replacement cost estimate for the roof. You know, we plan for the ASD standard 30-year seismic roof. I frankly don't know how much roof that building can hold up. So we have to design a roof that meets the intent, but it may not be 2.9 million, which again is the ASD school standard. It will likely be significantly less. Again, these are estimates. They will likely, you know, refine down, I believe, assuming we don't have too much abatement. But I think the cost estimates that we have will be less when you get down to brass tacks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Donnelly?
I think it's really important to note that reimbursement for the earthquake-related expenses is not guaranteed. It may not be in the most advantageous economic decision to accept federal money for that reimbursement because of the strings that it comes with, the requirements for buying earthquake insurance on those facilities, and we all know how much that costs here in Alaska. So you'd have to amortize that out and compare the cost with the cost of the earthquake insurance, and that's a decision the board has not made yet. We don't know how that's going to work out. So we just don't know if we're going to get that money back from FEMA or not. I want to just mention there was a motion to separate the earthquake dollars from in a separate bond proposition that failed 3-4, and there was also a motion to change the inlet view from a tear down and replace to a remodel project, and that failed.
Miss Meg, I got several ahead of you. Meg Zek, Miss Zek,
It's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the chart here, but I'm wondering if we could get a little bit more information. You mentioned first, second, and third tier, and I appreciate that we want to do the improvements together, but I'd really love to see a breakdown and kind of, I guess I need to know a little bit more about the analysis of where the cost savings is between first tier, second tier, and third tier improvements. And then also what projects kind of are left behind due to the need for earthquake repair, because we have some schools in our district that don't have basic fire apparatus. And if we're looking at a 2-year shift in bond proposals, that's 2 more years out. So I'd like to know kind of what's been bumped due to earthquake, and then what is actually earthquake repair versus just things we want to package with it because it would be more convenient, and what we project the cost savings actually being to do all the things we're wanting to do.
Mr. Perez Padilla? Okay. Mr. Dyson? Can you turn that mic on?
It always muddies the water when we have to dial into our decision process how to get other people's money, including the state and so on. When does the window for getting the FEMA money close?
You want to talk to that, George? Through the President, Mr. Dyson. Basically, it's ongoing, and it will keep ongoing until the last project is finished. And so the way it works is the district has a couple of options. Option one is they could ask for money to come in quarterly payments based on performance, or it also could be the whole lump sum amount. The lump sum amount won't come until after the project is finished.
All right, I probably asked the question inartfully. If this bond issue doesn't pass, do we lose our opportunity to get those FEMA funds?
No.
All right, so if this passed 3 years from now, we would still have that opportunity to get the FEMA funds?
Not necessarily. You have up to 3 years.
Okay.
And then you have to go and start getting extensions. Even to get to 3 years, you have to have at least one extension.
Yeah, that answered my question. It's a good question to ask and know about. So amongst the other things I don't want your decision process to be influenced very much is, what if you abandoned the property, you know, and it went back to its original owner, in this case, Eklutna? I suggest the Eklutna people that if and when they ever think that that property might be attractive to them for their purposes, come and cut you guys a deal, as in, hey, you abandon Eagle River site, and they would take care of restoring it and so on. You wouldn't have that multi-million-dollar obligation. But be that as it may, I think we have encouraged you, when you're having decisions related to real estate that somebody else owns, in this case Eklutna, that you at least notify them that those discussions are going on. So if they chose to participate, they'd at least know what's going on. Thank you.
Dr. Bishop?
Through the president to Member Dyson, that's a good point. And actually, I personally met with the former Eklutna CEO in discussion about not only greening, but Eagle River Elementary School. And this bond isn't necessarily for today. This is using the city's data on growth 5 and 10 years out.
Yes.
In regard to Eklutna land and their powder reserve as well. And so we sat together. The understanding is that the cost in the future is greater than today's cost. You know, why we decided to move forward. But certainly, I believe the interim CEO will invite in as well to update.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay, I had me next on the list. Mr. Rivera, you had mentioned that the Assembly is looking into if they can change our bond. Have you gotten a ruling on that?
Let me see if the right person's here. Yes, the right person is here. Yes, we do, and Ms. Ennis can expand on that.
Okay.
Get a mic, please.
And by the way, this has been preliminary because I wanted to come here and see what exactly what ideas they did have in mind. But in general, as the appropriating agency, they do have the ability to modify bonds up or down. They still have to be cognizant of school board policies and that you have decision-making, for instance, with respect to which schools stay open, so it's going to be a sort of a crossover. So today I'm trying to figure out some of your ideas, whether they have the ability to separate it into 2 packages, but they still have to respect school board policies.
Okay, thank you. Then Mr. Constance.
Thank you. Just a more philosophical comment that barring some extraordinary commentary coming through the public hearing process, am strongly in support of following the wisdom of the school board. You have found yourselves in the top of this conversation, looking at all of the details in a way we never will. And there are challenges, and what I need going forward is seeing it in the context of the future and how this plays into all of those pieces that are coming, so your 6-year plan. So I definitely tend to support your perspective as the experts in this conversation.
And I would just say in response to that, our 6-year plan does change constantly based on need. You know, when we talk about energy efficiency and doing special things, I mean, we have $650 million that we need in maintenance in our buildings that we maintain. So it is a daunting, and it's only going to get worse as we get less and less funding. Ms. Kennedy.
No, we're on. Okay, thank you. I actually have a couple of different questions. One is, you know, to me, there's kind of like 200, 800-pound gorillas to me in this bond proposal. And one is the fact that if I add up the numbers just kind of real generally, it looks like Chugach Eagle River has about $50 million worth of the projects. And if I include actually District 2, that draws in Bartlett. So District 2 is looking at having about $53 million worth of this total bond package. So my question is, I know one of the things that the school board has always tried to do is spread the wealth a little bit, you know, try to make sure there was something for everybody. And I certainly understand that more of this is earthquake related, but there was oftentimes an opportunity for the school district to do a little polling in regard to what the community might actually buy into. So was there any polling done in regard to this bond, especially one that is so heavily weighted toward District 2?
We did no official, however, that we, from last year in focusing on earthquake, that the lion's share of the bond is in regard to earthquake and earthquake repairs in the Eagle River Chugach area because of the manner in which that area was most affected.
Okay.
So that the evidence from last year just carried over. And then, of course, 2 additional smaller jobs were also placed in the bond to, you know, a theory was to essentially help sell that. Because the District 2 doesn't have a history of passing bonds, their own
Correct.
bonds even.
Or even our own, and yeah, as well as, but I will say, that, you know, as a history, Eagle River High School took us 4 years to get it actually passed on the bond, or the ballot, to get the bond passed on the ballot. My other question then, if I may, Aquarian and the fact that this $6.8 million goes toward basically maintaining or doing the improvements on a charter school. And so do you have intentions for changing policies, especially since we're looking at how policies, your policies will affect what we do with the bonds? Are there plans for changing policies in terms of how you allow construction or pay for construction with charter schools, or how you might change a policy in regard to how the Anchorage School District supplies a school building, you know, any kind of structure, facility?
This was unique in that we've never had a charter school in an ASD facility. Correct? Right. So it's a little bit unique. We didn't have any policy in place, so our governance committee will be looking at policies that we can address this and have in the future. Yeah.
Madam President, we could add that it is based off of the use of the facility is based off of statutory changes made at the state level in regard to first use, refusal of a building that's usable. At the time, it was a usable building and it's just aged, so.
But within that statute, there wasn't anything that required any upkeep or maintenance of the building, or so that was just a
right
arbitrary decision? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we'll be looking at that, yes. I have Holloman.
Yes, I wanted to touch back on the question from Mayor Berkowitz. We do have a policy change proposal such that whenever we do significant roof repair, we would have a parallel bond to add solar capability to a building. And we'll be looking at it on a site-by-site basis of what the payback, what the cost, what the long-term implications of it are. And at the last joint meeting, it was discussed that we might investigate the possibility of parking lot solar, because we have a lot of parking lot space. We haven't actually started an investigation into something like that. And some people, I think, envisioned us setting aside some of the parking lot for solar. I was more envisioning a nice roofed area that school board members would be able to park under when they're visiting schools, and maybe administrative staff and assembly members as well. But we have pushed that off for a couple of months because there was no way it was going to happen in time for this bond package, and we've got a lot of lead time before we see our next bond packages coming. But we will address it in January, and if it is adopted, then it would be available. It would be part of our process come the next bond package, that any major roof work would also have as an option inclusion of solar in it. I think there's opportunity for UAA and engineering to possibly collaborate with resources from the city and the district to look at things that fit Anchorage in particular, that, and one might be modifying how we improve our roofs, how solar mounts on a roof structure, and begin to conform our buildings to efficiently allow something like that, as opposed to, there's concern about solar adding to the difficulty of maintenance down the road and such. And I think those are all things we might be able to address and really optimize for our location. And I'm going to pick up on Mr. Constant's thing a little bit. It wasn't an arbitrary decision. That word kind of caught my... We're in a situation with Aquarian where we have something we really can't let go on, and that's water coming through a wood frame building. Aquarian is unique in that it's the only charter in an ASD facility. Because of that, they're enjoined from taking direct action themselves. It has to come through us. It is complicated, and we as a board do need to adopt a general policy for how we deal with it. But it'll be kind of like adopting a general policy in a family with 12 or 13 kids. It won't look exactly the same for each one of them because they are all unique. So, thank you.
Just a quick response. I'm glad to know that the school district's finally looking at doing things on the roofs. It's been a long time coming. I don't know why y'all have been slow movers on this. Most of Anchorage has investigated it and have determined that it's an economically attractive option. I want to reiterate the offer we made at the last meeting to come take a look at the roof of the Egan Center, where there was non-penetrating ways of fixing large-scale solar to the roofs. I think those are options that are available. I also would reiterate that there are ways that these kind of projects can be financed separately than through bond packages, and with a little bit of creativity, I think the school district can save a lot of money on its energy bills and put those funds into the classroom rather than continuing to do things the way they have been doing in spite of the fact that there's been significant technological change in the intervening time.
And just to let you know, I do believe we have contacted, my understanding, we've contacted the Muni, and the tour has been put off till spring to look at the center. Okay. Ms. Bellamy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Both my points have already been covered, specifically the pending energy policy discussions before the Governance Committee. We're really taking it seriously and to continue what we're already doing. And then the uniqueness of the Aquarian charter school situation, that's already been discussed as well. Thank you.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Madam President. A couple items. I appreciate that the district will be taking a look and the board at the charter school facility process and policy. And I thought actually there was a charter school that was located in this building at one point. Okay.
Right next to us, yeah.
Okay. Thanks. So my question actually has to do with inlet view and the design that's included here. And was a design-build approach considered? And what's the selection criteria in terms of which approach is decided?
Through the president to Member LaFrance. So the design, build, delivery process is an option that would obligate the administration, were that to be the preferred method, to go to the board for approval. The design, bid, build is the approved method to promote fair competition.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Zidell.
Thank you. So actually my question follows up on Ms. LaFrance. Was there consideration to, this is to replace, but was there consideration to get design on both replace and remodel? And do we have a ballpark on what the remodel cost might actually be down the road. And I don't know if we could use the Airport Heights remodel as any kind of an indicator. And then kind of with regard to Inlet View and Aquarian, I'm trying to get a sense of where these bond projects fall within what was already on the list of the capital improvement plan. Aquarian obviously probably wasn't on the list, so I kind of want to know what's been bumped due to that. And then was Inlet View already on the list for design for replacement, or was it designed for remodel, or was it designed for something?
So through the president, and I'll try to, you might have to help me remember all those aspects of the question. So Inlet View was on the 6-year plan. It was actually on the plan for next year, and pending the adjustment that will come this year, we're going to move it forward. The question about whether or not the district looked at remodel, so the district did look at remodel of Inlet View several years ago. In fact, we have an existing, not a design, but we have a project analysis review that does scope out what would be a renewal for Inlet View. And I want to say that the figure that we looked at there, and Edie, you can correct me if you're pulling those numbers. Talking about Inlet View, I want to say it was about $7 million to do a renovation of Inlet View, but that I think was just for like a building life extension. Inlet View is a unique structure, 1955. So it's not something that we could say look at Airport Heights as a comparative. Right now the plan moving forward based on what was approved by the board last year was that we would pursue a design to replace the existing building. I don't want to sound flippant, but I don't know that we can have a foot in two canoes with regards to the design. We'd have to tell the architecture team, hey, you're either going to replace it or you're going to refurbish it, because there's a cost associated, and it would be very hard to adjust what would be a replacement school to a remodel. So it's one or the other, I guess is what it comes down to.
I might add, we had, the demographer did some work on that, and that's why it came up as one of the higher need buildings at that time, and it was on the capital. It's been on the capital list, I think, over the last 10 years, but one of the decisions for that too, it's been discussed, it's probably another elephant in the room, is the building it to 2-story. It's not recommended to be a 500 student building. There's 300 students in the catchment there. But due to green space for schools is generally recommended through deed at 15 acres, and it's a lot smaller footprint. So not to take away the green space is highly used by the community around it and the homes. To not use and take away that space to build additional classrooms and to remove some of those portables would be to then build up. And that was another part of that discussion in regard to how, to have a new building at Inlet View. So that came into discussion at the time as well, a couple years ago.
So I just want to say that we have a lot on our agenda, and if we need to have a separate meeting to discuss the bond, because there seems to be a lot of interest in this, we can schedule a work session. I do still have about 4 people, and after, okay, so I have 3 people, and after that, we're going to cut the conversation off. Okay, so Mr. Dunbar.
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Mitchell?
So I'd like to just follow up on the Inlet View issue. It is, I had, when we were having the discussion about the bond, I had said, could we have that piece say Inlet View design for either rebuild or renovation, so that we leave that open? And I was told that that is something that is not acceptable to the bond council. It has to be one or the other. In my mind personally, I have the same questions that you all do. Is it better to add on? But I've been told by Mr. Roth and his group, that they've looked at it, and from a long-term cost perspective, it makes more sense to tear the building down and have something that really is going to work long-term. So I think that's why we approved what we did. I think it might be worthwhile, depending on what you all think, to have a separate work session on the bond. I don't know if we want to get into this specifically, but I have a question for you all. I don't know how serious this is, but I know that there is a movement to try to get Chugiak and Eagle River to be separated from the municipality. Is that a real thing? Is that a possibility that might actually happen? Because if so, my question would be, if we have Greening and Eagle River Elementary as the lion's share of this bond, and that actually comes to pass, does the municipality get left with that debt, and that's now a separate municipality or governmental structure?
Who wants to answer that?
So I will take a brief, and then I will give it to the representatives from Eagle River Chugiak. So in specific to the second part of your question, Ms. Mitchell, and then I will allow the others to answer the first on the realities. But this has been described, and I think Mr. Dyson does a good way of describing this as a grand divorce if it ever does happen. And during a divorce, there's extensive negotiations, and this would be one of those factors in those negotiations. I will defer the rest of the question to the members from Eagle River Chugiak.
Okay, Ms. Crystal.
Thank you. And I will just chime in with what Mr. Rivera said, and that was exactly what we like to quote Mr. Dyson about. It is a negotiated kind of a thing if we get to that point. Are we trying to get to that point? I would say yes, there is definitely a viable process going on right now. Apparently, they just raised the funds just this past week to begin a feasibility study. So there's a lot of private money going into just answering, can we do it? So until that's really decided what that actually looks like and how that would work, I will say that there are people working on that, but we don't have an answer until it materializes. But it's a serious thing. So thank you.
Mr. Dyson, you were next on the list. You were our last speaker.
Yeah, so we went through this 30 years ago, and I'm the one that coined the phrase, the great divorce. But like all divorce things, then there's a property settlement. And the question came up, it looked on the paper then, and I'm sure it's true now, that Anchorage taxpayers, property tax, had significantly subsidized the construction of schools in Eagle River. And so if indeed the, quote, divorce happened, then they're arguing over the property, should the Anchorage taxpayers who subsidize the construction get a payback? It's logical and fair. And my own analysis then was that Eagle River did not have the tax base that could support even the current level of services and so on. These people that are doing it says that's wrong, and it would easily. Hope they're right, hope I'm wrong. But it's unfortunate it comes up at this time. I think that what Mr. Rivera was saying politely is that we are worried that the magnitude of the bond package will have a smaller chance of being successful. And all of us in the decision-making things have to think about the risk-benefit analysis, and is this bond package too big when we're not even sure yet that we've bottomed out in our recession and so on, and it all goes down. Then you add on to it that Eagle River's position in the bond package is disproportionate and so on. Then you add the great divorce going on here, and you could see that those are all kind of negative things for the bond package passing. So that's what sparks this. There's nothing irresponsible or punitive or anything else about the Assembly's attitude about it. It's very pragmatic. How can we make this work? And so that's the background on that. The other thing I wanted, Ms. Kennedy and I are going to be in a probably spirited, perhaps entertaining discussion with the community on Monday night about this whole school issue. It's extraordinary, the diversity of the opinions, but how strong they think they are. And I just had a significant conversation, Tuesday morning, and so on, and I am quite surprised. I want you, Dr. Bishop, to hear this. I'm quite surprised at the diversion of the apparently authoritative discussions on how the occupancy is for our schools in the Eagle River area and Bartlett, and so some people say you can combine the high schools easily over at the Chuyak facility, and other people are saying no way in hell it's going to be over that capacity, and then I thought that we had spare capacity in all of our elementary schools, and I'm told no, we don't, and so on and so forth. And then I was told, we had this huge bubble of kids coming through a decade or two ago, and we saw it in our elementary and then in the middle school, and so on. That wave coming through is all past, and demographics say that what's coming is less, and so on. So I think I speak Ms. Kennedy and I, that we need the best information you can get to us in advance of our discussion on Monday night, and your security people, if we could borrow them.
We have both those things taken care of for you.
Yeah, and there will be several board members there also that'll be joining you, so. All right, so let's move on. I think we've covered the Aquarian request unless there's anything else that needs to be added. So the next thing is our, okay, Mr. Donnelly.
And that's the $82 million in this bond proposal is about 28 million over the amount of debt that's going to be retired during that period. The board has, over the last few years, maintained that balance previously.
Ms. Hildy?
Good point.
And I'll just include the conversation we had about not increasing it over the 2-year period. So whether it's a 2-year bond this year, or it balances out where it's 82 this year and 25 next year, where over those 2 years it would not be, but we have significant earthquake damages that need to be addressed this year with our deferred maintenance. So next year we have significant discussions on a much lower bond so that the aggregate would not increase the bond debt.
Okay, we're going to move on. Comprehensive plan, land use, one is safe walking routes, school zone, Tudor Road near Benny Benson School. And I believe this is the assembly.
Isn't this? I believe this is yours, Mr. Dunbar.
I apologize. So my understanding is that we have some folks here to speak to this. I had spoken with Mr. Falsey about this. And I'll just very quickly talk about the motivation for this. Benny Benson is in my district. One of their students was tragically struck and killed at the intersection of Tudor and Campbell Airstrip Road. But that's not all that's happened in that area. There have been a myriad of serious accidents, both at that specific intersection and on Tudor Road, where you're most probably familiar with the Muldoon Curve and leading down the hill. I had another friend that was killed in a car accident on that bend, and I know that there was another serious accident at that intersection just a couple weeks ago. My understanding is that there is no school zone for Benny Benson, despite the fact that Benny Benson's students who don't have traditional school bus access, they do have some school buses that go there, I believe, from East High School.
Actually, it comes from King Tech High
Oh,
School.
King Tech, yeah, that's what I meant,
So
yeah.
they gather from their schools,
Yeah.
take a bus into King Tech, and then they take a shuttle bus to the school.
But a number of students ride the city buses as well, I believe.
It's one of the options on the application.
And the city bus stop is across the street, across Tudor. So for a variety of reasons, it's I think, a very dangerous area, and there is no school zone along Tudor. I've heard because it's a charter school, but I don't think that's right. I've heard it's because it's sort of set back from Tudor. But I'd love to hear, why isn't there a school zone? Can we add a school zone? And there are any other traffic improvements we could make to that area to make that safer for Benny Benson students and everybody in Anchorage? Thank you.
So that is.
Could
does
you
not-
introduce yourself,
Oh,
please?
I apologize. Heather Phelp. I am the Director of Transportation for Anchorage School District. So Benny Benson, it does not have a school zone. It is a school that is collective throughout the entire district. So they have several options that they have on their application for the school.
If you want to take that off, if you want to stay back.
Okay, sorry, I apologize. So they have on the application several different options for the school. They have parent, self, transportation. They also have people mover, as Forrest has said. And they have a school bus shuttle that is brought from King Tech. We shuttle both morning, midday, and afternoon for those students.
So why can't we put up a school zone sign there? I guess I didn't understand.
We don't have a set walking zone there. If you'd like to request us to do one, we could go through the committee that we have for safe student walking and see if we can find a safe walking zone within that area. It's a doable piece for us.
Mr. Dunbar?
Could I,
Can't speak for all my colleagues, but I personally, as the assembly member from that district, and I hope Mr. Peterson agrees with me, would like to make that request. I think there might be other, I mean, there's a challenge, right, because Tudor Road is not our road. But anything we can do to both encourage DOT to take action and take action on our own, both as a school district and the assembly, I would like us to try, so.
Yeah, Madam President, if I may, as we have done in previous meetings, I don't think it would be out of order for us to make a motion at this meeting to do such action.
Thank you. Before we do that, could we hear from the other folks that might be able to present today?
My name is Stephanie Marmello. I'm the municipal traffic engineer. So related to school zones, just kind of giving process. Typically, as Heather said, most schools that have a school boundary that actually have a district within it, they also have a school walking boundary that is it a mile and a half? So the school district has said within a mile and a half, those students can walk to that school. And then the safe walking route manual has been put together for those schools that have a walking boundary, and we have a safe walking route for those schools. For Benny Benson, because it is not a districted school, it doesn't have the same policy, so there hasn't been kind of the determination of this is the walking boundary, and if this is the walking boundary, this is the safe route to get to the school. So kind of when you're looking at school zones and evaluations and processes, school zones are specifically installed for the safety of schools, of students walking to and from schools and generally crossing major schools, maybe not just even walking directly along. So that's really why this school itself, because it does not have a walking boundary, it does not have a school zone associated with it.
Introduce yourself, sir.
Yeah, hello, I'm Scott Thomas, and I'm with DOT, and I'm the traffic engineer. And the first thing to know is that we have an agreement with the city to evaluate school zones and school zone needs, so all requests go through the city. And before you solve school zones, as the school district mentioned here, is you really have to have a plan, a walking route plan. You have to get people to the road. Is it a good route to get from the neighborhood to the road? So a whole plan. And as the state, we provide the standards that come from the federal government and the manuals for school zone safety and to promote walking. And through this agreement, we will review city requests and school district requests on state roads. They start at the local level, so there's a process. You can request a walking route evaluation that gets you all the way from home to school. What is that attendance boundary, or what are those routes? We really don't have a solution if we pick one spot. It has to be the whole thing. And then when it comes to Tudor Road, if that's part of the equation, we do have national, state standards and manuals on how to solve walking routes with devices. And that is by statute the same manuals the city follows. And as far as the solutions that would come to play on a road like Tudor, one of the best devices for pedestrians is a push-button activated signal that stops traffic. And as far as other solutions, we follow those standards and manuals, and if there's a committee at the local level, Safe Routes to School, that evaluates options, and if they recommend an option other than in these choices that come from national traffic standards, it does, because it's a state road, it does have to be, if it's a different choice, it has to be sent to the state, to DOT for review. So I just want to leave you with that kind of process. There is a process. What we strive for is uniformity, consistency, so that the general public understands why it's there, and what to do. We know that if they don't find it credible or reasonable, there's a lot of problems with what comes out of that. So we follow national standards, and we're happy to review a request that goes through Safe Routes to School process. The request can come from a community council, the city, a community organization, this body. So I just want to give you that outline. Thank you.
And I'm Bill Falsey, the Anchorage Municipal Manager. Just to bottom line that for you then, if you're interested in anything, the first process is to send it for evaluation for whether there should be a Safe Routes to School designation. And I think if you're looking to take some kind of action, that's what we might want to focus on.
Mrs. Tao?
Thank you. My question is, when we utilize public transportation as one of the options for transportation at a charter school, do we consider Safe Routes to School from the public transportation stops to the schools? Because we should be expecting and anticipating pedestrian access to the school from the public bus stop. So that's my question.
I'm going to respond on behalf of the municipality. To my knowledge, no, we have not reviewed that in the past.
I believe that all the maps that we have located on our websites show that they are just district home to school, not including charters, because most of the time if you have a charter, you're saying you're transporting your student themselves.
Except this is not a charter school, this is an alternative school.
Correct.
Yep.
Right. Is that the same?
Well, no, it's not the same,
Okay.
but this school is particular because it feeds from the entire district. So it's not just one segmented area that these students come from. They come from all over.
I think
all schools.
she just had a question. Do we
Oh, I
advertise
apologize.
it? What she, like, literally had a question. And no, we don't.
No, I apologize.
Okay, I think it might be a good idea.
Ms. Mitchell? And then you first.
Sorry.
So to follow up with what Ms. Zolotel said, in this situation, having a safe walking route really does not make sense. It's not a neighborhood school. It's not a school that draws from that area. What I think is simply being asked is that if we are saying public transportation is an option for this school, we should there needs to be a different process, a different reason to have that school zone thing there. We should make it safe for those students to cross the street, because that is a very, very dangerous spot. So it doesn't fall into the process that normally takes, care of this, and we need to find an alternate process.
Mr. Dunbar?
So I'd like to make the motion to, what exactly is the motion? How should I frame it? What would help you guys the most?
Well, I'm not sure what would help us the most, but I think that the form of the motion, I'll look to the real experts, would be that you recommend that the Benny Benson Secondary School be studied for the possible designation of a safe route to school. Is that correct? I'm looking at the true experts.
Is that right?
Yeah.
To your point, I mean,
I think I would suggest that plus any other designated or potential walking routes, because I think safe routes to school, if I'm not
Yeah.
misinterpreting what's being said, it has a very specific meaning about walking routes to schools, and that's not going to work.
Right. Can one of you speak to that,
Yeah,
please?
if I might add that safe routes to school is for school attendance, and so if you're saying that you want to get kids to walk across this road, you do have to have a walking route plan, and that if that plan is from a bus stop or some other location, that's part of your planning request.
Well, okay, so I'm going to make that motion.
Okay, before you do. So, I just want to be clear, part of the motion, because you said we don't address public transportation as a means of getting to school yet. Just about every one of our high school students and middle school students, I believe, have bus passes now that they use to get to and from school. So that is something I think, if that's not part of what you address, it needs to be part of that study.
President Marset, I agree with that. However, I don't want that broader discussion to slow down action specific to this school. And so perhaps we could have two motions, one specific to this school and then another one that addresses that broader issue. Are you amenable to that?
Well, I think, though, that given the public transportation, it'll be more in favor of getting what we want at that school if we can address that. Would you agree or no?
Are you asking
Mhm.
interpretation of
Yeah.
the state and national standards?
Right.
Yeah. All the standards are guided by the whole route, and if there's crossing of a road involved, then engineering standards give us choices to make that crossing work.
Regardless of the transportation
But when you
mode.
say what you want, that this is all subject to consistency and uniformity with schools in an entire area of the city and the state. And what I will tell you is that those standards do not recommend 20-mile-an-hour zones for high schools. So there are school treatments, there are options, but like anyone coming from a bus stop or crossing at a signal, the number one recommendation is a push-button activated pedestrian signal that stops traffic. And then I would add that I looked around at Anchorage from the state point of view, and I'm actually, I would have to say it's done a lot more than most communities in investing in grade separations. When you really want to eliminate conflict, there's more than 36, probably more than 40 separations in this city, not all school related, but when we struggle to solve pedestrian conflict, I can see even before my career time that the community has invested heavily when you want to.
Can I make a motion and then very briefly speak to it? Okay, so I'm going to move to, what am I doing? I'm going to send a question to this committee to investigate a safe route to school and potentially a school zone for this particular school, for Benny Benson, and the broader question of whether or not we should consider our public transit access when we're developing our safe routes to schools. And then can I very briefly speak to this, President Marset? Oh, thank you so much. So, I want to just briefly describe what happened in this case. There is a push-button stop at Tudor and Benny Benson, or at Tudor and Campbell Airstrip Road. But that intersection is at the bottom of a hill, and not only does it get, it wasn't icy this time, but it gets very icy. This student was 16 years old and he was riding his bicycle. And it's true that Benny Benson draws from all over the city, but a disproportionate number of their students come from East Anchorage for a variety of reasons. He was on his bicycle, he was riding there he lived in the Russian Jack area. He got to the intersection, and this is from a witness. One of his friends from school was at the bus stop down the street, and they said that he looked at them and waved and then pushed out he pressed the button, but the button's on the wrong side of the pole, so people that are driving down the hill can't see. He pushed out into traffic, he was struck by the car, the light was turning yellow, they think, and so she had gunned it to make the yellow at the bottom of this hill. And the witness, the student who was at the bus stop on the other side, said that his body almost hit the traffic light because he was thrown so far up into the air and died instantly. So there is a push button stop there, but it's 45 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour at the bottom of a hill, and people gun it to get through that light. And the bus stop is on the other side, and lots of students use it. And kids are coming from East Anchorage. So I just urge you to please do something about this intersection. We'll use the Safe Routes to School process. I hope DOT looks beyond that, though. This is dangerous for the students. It's dangerous for everyone. But I hope my colleagues support the motion. Thank you.
Do we have a second? Yes. Okay. Okay, then it's open for conversation. Mr. Holloman?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, due to changes in my life, I go through that intersection a lot at a lot of different hours, and it is pedestrian busy. It's not simply students, and what you described is exactly true. I'm watching the walk lights, and I do the same thing. But if there are people standing around, yeah, it negates all that. But there are frequently 2, 3, 4, 5 people waiting to cross there. And it is an area, especially if you're coming to the east, you have come out of a congested area, and the road opens up before you, and it's fairly empty, and the opportunity to make up time is there, and I don't doubt that people do that a lot. It is a dangerous place.
I actually live in that neighborhood right there, and it is very concerning. And my husband actually saw that student get hit and what was left afterwards. And even if it's just one student there, that is one too many, and we do need to make a change. Okay, we're gonna take a vote, just by show of hands. Does everybody know what the motion is? Okay. So at this time, show of hands of those in favor. Okay, so that it is unanimous. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
May I just get a confirmation of who the second was on that?
Hildy. Okay, the other thing we have on here is meeting dates for 2020. I am going to say that we have looked at this. I believe there's 2 meeting dates.
Apologies, point of order, Madam President. We do have a second item under comprehensive plan, the hazardous
Oh,
walking
I'm
routes
sorry.
presentation, or resolution, excuse me.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Apologies. Would you like to speak to that, Mr. Rivera, or is there someone else?
That is Vice Chair LaFrance's item.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. So at our last meeting, we had a draft resolution in front of us that we discussed concerning hazardous walking routes. And that resolution has been submitted for the December 17th Assembly agenda as an item. And I just wanted to mention that last month at the Bayshore Clat Community Council meeting, 100th and Victor, that intersection that generated this conversation and public testimony was discussed. It was a really great community discussion, and I think Stephanie Mormillo and Heather Phelps, and there was someone else from ASD there as well. And the council resolved actually to request consideration for pedestrian safety enhancements at that intersection, and I understand that there'll be more conversation about what that will mean, and it will involve those segments of the community, the PTA from the area, parents, and the community council. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, and you've just received a calendar that shows our conflicts. Yeah, and I'm going to let Dr. Bishop, because I don't have my glasses on.
Okay, yep, I had to get that. So we tried to, Katie did a great job of color coding it, taking a look at the school year. The first sheet is the present school year, and we're on 2 different calendars. The assembly is on the yearly calendar, annual calendar, and we're not. So our calendar year is July 1. That's why we don't have it all figured out. Is that okay to continue?
I just wanted to be in the queue for when we're done.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
So the yellow are scheduled ASD meetings, and the
squares, red square, are the assembly. And if you notice this year, the outside of the April 21st, which is just a 1-hour conflict for the confirmation of elections, are the 5th and the 19th. And those were selected. We do generally the 1st and the 3rd. And again, we got to this place because we saw a pattern in the assembly to when the board decided to change, and then we realized, oops, the pattern didn't stay true the rest of the year. So it was an error. But on the 5th and the 19th, the graduation week is the week of the 12th. So the board it would be difficult for us to change to that week. So that is this year. There's 2 conflicts this year for the rest of this year. And then if you look for next year, we have adopted our full count. We haven't yet set it, but this is what the actual school calendar has been set, but not the proposed ASD meetings are in gold, and the scheduled assembly meetings are in red squares. And if you notice from January on in 2021, you aren't scheduled yet. We are, just because of the differences in calendars. And we've identified a possible conflict on the 17th of November. And that would be, if the Assembly's budget is complete, that's the Assembly, that would be canceled for the Assembly, is the information we heard. So we're looking at the next fall to have one conflict if we were to stay with the Tuesday schedule. But wanted to share that, those dates, and then I'll turn it back over. Just wanted to assist in understanding the notes that we have on the schedule.
And the 2 dates that were in conflict on May, it's one of the things that I was going to discuss with the board about moving those meeting dates just for those 2, possibly to Monday or something else. But I haven't had a chance to put that before the board, so that'll be at our next meeting. Ms. Rivera.
Thank you, Madam President. So I might actually have an easier solution.
Oh, okay.
Madam Clerk, in May, is there any reason why those meetings need to stay the way they are?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The staff and the assembly probably do not want to meet on a Tuesday after a holiday. We have fairly simple criteria, but you can imagine having work sessions the Friday before a holiday or getting staff to prepare for a meeting on a Tuesday after a holiday. That is one of the criteria for our scheduling.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And then the second question I had for you is November, those 3 meetings, is that a normal practice for us?
Mr. Chair, that used to be our practice. This was what we had proposed this year. We have done a great job with OMB proposing dates. Everyone would like the budget to be approved before Thanksgiving. However, if there is some reason that it can't be approved, for example, on the 17th, we would want to do it on the 24th, not in December. That is my understanding that is OMB's preference. We have tentatively scheduled both of those meetings to accommodate that.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Sorry, no easy solutions.
No. Well, we're definitely going to bring that up at our next board meeting, so we'll be talking about those dates. Any other comments? Okay. Sure, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thanks, Madam President. So why did you change it in the first place? Did it used to be Mondays, and why can't you just do Mondays so we don't have to deal with
It
this?
used to be Mondays, but it's kind of the same reason that you guys have them on Tuesdays, is when there's a holiday on Monday, it impacts getting ready for the meeting, and then our staff coming in after a weekend, it keeps them from having to work during the weekend to get ready for those board meetings, so it really was due to a lot of reasons.
Assume Wednesday and Thursday are out because of community councils that you all
Yes.
appear at, just like we do?
Yes.
Okay.
There's fewer conflicts if we do it on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, if there's no other discussion, the next thing I have on the agenda is the ASD Ethics Officer. Oh, sure, yes, Mr. Perez.
I just want to make it clear that you said that there is going to be an effort to change the days that there's a conflict. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, and I'm not sure who had the ASD ethics officer.
Thank you, Madam President. That is mine. And let me pull up my script. So the purpose of this agenda item is to remind the Assembly and school board members that the Ethics Code anticipates there will be an ethics officer for the MOA and ASD. We wanted to elevate the role of ethics officers to the Assembly members and the school board members. Assembly members frequently review routine items with the Municipal Ethics Officer, Deputy Municipal Attorney D. Ennis. Similarly, a number of ASD employees complete a common Board of Ethics form that are submitted. I've been told flawlessly by ASD Purchasing Director David Whiting to the clerk's office for the Board of Ethics. We understand that ASD has a new ethics officer, and we wanted to highlight this appointment to ensure a continued productive relationship with the Board of Ethics and board staff. I understand the new ASD ethics officer has been invited to attend the next regular Board of Ethics meeting in January. We look forward to the Assembly and School Board support of the ethics officer to ensure fulfillment of their important role in implementing the Municipal Ethics Code.
And Mr. Tiefer, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Madam President. My name is Matt Tiefert. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for the Anchorage School District. The ethics officer for the district has, I think, typically been the person in this role, and I assumed this role in March and will look forward to working with the Assembly. As mentioned, I am invited to the January 9 meeting with the Ethics Board and look forward to attending and to continuing to serve in this role.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ennis?
Yeah, and I'm the Municipal Anchorage Ethics Officer. In the past, we had sort of some unfortunate collisions between the Ethics Board, the Anchorage Ethics Board, and gift giving with teachers. We went out of our way to solve that problem. And one of the reasons to have a strong ethics officer at the school district is so that we can defer many ethics issues to your way of doing things. Because you have a whole different system. And again, Mr. Whiting has been just wonderful within the purchasing department. We want to defer to you as much as possible. We don't want those unfortunate collisions. So we are thrilled that there's an identified ethics officer because there really hasn't been to date. And so that we have mutual respect for one another's ethics, we need that strong person.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, any other comments on that? Thank you both for joining us. Climate change is the next one.
Thank you. And I will be brief. The mayor, wherever he went to, stole a little bit of my thunder on here. Thank you. So I wanted to ask about the tour of the Egan, but it sounds like that's been arranged, so I want to thank you so much for that. And then wanted to give a quick update. At the work session, I talked about a potential avenue for ASD students to get involved in the work that the municipality is doing for the climate action plan. And I've been in discussion with the administration, and this is tentative yet, they haven't agreed to it, but the idea of the Youth Climate Action Council looks like it might become a subcommittee or subgroup of the Youth Advisory Commission. And I am meeting with them, their executive committee this month, and then meeting with them, their full commission meeting in January. So hopefully at our next quarterly meeting, I'll have an update and avenues for your students to get involved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we did have some emergency preparedness was one of the things that was asked to talk about. And I think we have some, yes, Ms. Kennedy.
Turned it off, yeah. All right. Thank you, Madam President. I just briefly wanted to bring this up because Ms. Michaelis and I were having a conversation not too long ago about emergency shelters in our community, and especially with greening being offline, there have been a lot of questions about, so where is our emergency shelter? And in having that same, kind of giving that same question to the municipality, the answer that I got was, well, we don't really have designated emergency shelters around the municipality until an emergency happens and then places get designated. I think that's a little different than the way the Anchorage School District handles it. So I was hoping that maybe we could have some reconciliation, in terms of how we determine those and what the expectation of the public could be in regard to emergency shelters. So, thank you.
Through the president, very briefly, you're getting a couple of handouts. The first is a publication that the district provides, and it's consistent with, you know, what has been coordinated with the Office of Emergency Management. So in short, the district has 22 designated school shelter sites. And what's unique about these buildings, they all, as an example, have backup power generation. They also have what we call an emergency supply container, which is a standardized container that has a number of supplies available. And their immediate purpose is to provide for the needs of students and staff of those schools and schools that may be within that immediate proximity in the event that it takes a while to reunite students with their parents. We have coordinated and have a long-standing memorandum of agreement with the municipality. And in fact, the 22 shelter sites are identified in the municipality's emergency operations plan as potential locations for municipality shelter sites.
Yes. Right here.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
Hi, Amanda. and I'm sure she's nodding vigorously up and down. So you know, there is a process. Again, going back to, you know, what their initial primary purpose is. You know, there is a process whereby, you know, if there is a need and these buildings are available, that, you know, through really the OEM director, that it can be requested that they be used for a municipal site. And it is really kind of a transition through the American Red Cross to become a municipal site. The only caution I would you know, cite to the group here, and why it's not an immediate thing. So the idea being is, you know, we are always looking to resume school as rapidly as possible. So if you do this process where you convert a school shelter into a municipal site, the timeliness of being able to revert that facility back to a school is impacted. So we understand in extremis in need, we absolutely are part of the municipal team that would happen. But we are just mindful of if it looks like the emergency is going to be short in nature, that we would be looking to Amanda and her team to be identifying alternative sites in the city for that purpose. But again, we understand, you know, we are part of one community. If it's a need, then that's what the district is going to do.
Do you want to pass the mic to the municipalities?
Is there a question?
No, I just know if you wanted to make a comment about what the
Do you want me to kind of rephrase that a bit? Thank you. I would just say that I think there was maybe a difference in the understanding between what the municipality was doing in terms of designating emergency shelters versus what the Anchorage School District has done. And I just wanted to see if we could kind of reconcile that so that there was a message to give to the public in regard to what our emergency shelter availability really is. Thank you.
Right, so in designating shelters, there's some concern surrounding that in pre-designating shelters, because we have to really consider the circumstances of the incident in order to best meet the needs of the survivors. So we do have private facilities, government facilities, school facilities, all different types of facilities that we can use that have been assessed in the different areas of the city. And we make the decision with the American Red Cross as to which one is the most appropriate, dependent on the needs of the emergency or the disaster.
Can I just comment on that real quick? Sure. You know, and I guess I would just say that from the community's perspective, people want to know in advance where their emergency shelter is. So that's kind of, you know, and I understand what you're saying is that those might maybe need to be designated on a specific situation basis. But the questions that I've been getting is, well, since specifically to Greening, everybody said, hey, Greening is our emergency shelter for that particular area of Eagle River. So since that's not available, where do people go? So some people kind of want to know that in advance. So that's a really interesting concept, though, the idea that it may not necessarily be anything that's designated in advance, but that there are plenty of potential options out there. And then through the Red Cross and the municipality, those sites will be designated when the need arises. So is that fair? And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. The last thing we had, and we are at 12 o'clock now, is everybody okay with extending this for about maybe 10, 15 minutes? No? Do you guys need to leave? We have a 12:30. Oh, okay, okay.
And there's one more item,
there's only one
President
more on
Marset, too.
Right,
Tobacco 21.
right, and that's what I
After
was
that,
saying,
two
yeah.
more.
So we'll very quickly do the tobacco 21.
Thank you, President Marset. And thank you to Dr. Bishop for the letter of support for the Tobacco 21 ordinance that we recently passed. And this, raised the minimum age to buy tobacco to 21 here in Anchorage. And it removed the penalty for minor in possession, actually removed minor in possession from the code. So we've recently learned that APD is citing minors in possession of tobacco under state law. And apparently, according to APD, there's been a surge in complaints from ASD personnel to school resource officers concerning vaping on school grounds, and that SROs have been issuing citations. And I know we don't have time now to go into it, but a couple questions that have arisen concerns ASD tobacco policy and how it's enforced, and who gets to decide if a student is issued a ticket or when an SRO is called.
Well, and I think we have some of those same questions, so it'll be something that, you want to speak to it very quickly?
Thank you. And the President and I spoke about this, and we're going to look into it. We don't have the names of people who have been cited, so it was difficult for us. So the release of those names would have to be given by the police department for us to look into where those are happening in the schools, because we don't initially get that. But we do have presumptive sanctions for tobacco and things like that in vaping. So we can go over those at a later time, but when we saw the article come out, we didn't have any information either.
May I do a quick follow-up? Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Just a quick follow-up. So you don't get a regular report from SROs that detail where citations occur? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay,
So
thank
we'll
you.
be looking into that too.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to forego member comments unless, Mr. Dyson, you have something quickly?
I do.
Okay.
And the ethics thing brought it up. I was very close to the ethics issues that went on in the legislature. 8 or 9 people, went to jail. So it made me hypersensitive when I got this job back. So I was approached a situation, a close family member was bidding on a job for a significant property owner here that had issues before the assembly. And those were coincident events, and so alarm bells went off for me. So I talked with our ethics people, and the solution they came up with, any of us that are faced with that kind of a situation, put it in writing that the situation is there, and let it be put in the file in case things go wrong. So I think that's the thing to know, and I'd like both the ethics groups to realize that and let people in policy decisions like ours know that in those circumstances, there's a way to preemptively start protecting yourself. Thank you. Pardon? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. I promise I will be really brief. 2 things. First, I want to thank the school board for passing a resolution regarding the 2020 census. And then second, want to ask that any answers to questions from assembly members get sent as soon as possible, and especially regarding the bond package. Thank you.
And that was a quick question I was going to ask. Do we want to schedule a work session on the bond?
Yes, but I think the answer should come before the work session.
Okay. All right. Our next thing is our, oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Kennedy.
We do, thank you. I did want to mention that you are all invited out to the Chugiak Eagle River area on Monday night at 6:30 at our northernmost school, which is Mirror Lake Middle School. If you haven't been out there, it'd be a good chance to also see the school. But I'm sure a lot of the school board members will be there, but I just wanted to make sure that the assembly members realize that they are invited as well. And I believe it's actually been posted on the municipal calendar of events for assembly members. So, is that true? Yeah, thank you.
And speaking of that very quickly, we do have our legislative luncheon. I realize there's a conflict with the assembly, but it's Friday, December the 13th from 11 a.m. to 1:30 at the LIO office, so if you can stop by, please do. At this point, we would have audience participation. I believe we have one person that would like to speak very quickly.
Can I get a microphone?
Pardon?
Can I get a microphone?
Yes.
I didn't respectfully. Thank you very much. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Matsu Valley. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more likely in public interest. I'm sure you could basically guess what I'm going to speak about. School board meetings happen the same time as the assembly. What happened here you did have on the agenda. Thank you. But I see a continued policy of indifference. Nothing's changed. I promise that we'll do it better, but the fact is, and remind you now, is we're moving into what, the fourth meeting in the row of a school board meeting and assembly meeting happen at the same time. Now, in reference to that issue, during those meetings that were happening, the school board was dealing with approval of the bonds, sending it on, and the assembly was dealing with the budget. The public had to choose between the two. Now it's being forwarded over to the assembly for examination and public comment. But how can it be a fair examination when the public was divided and even the assembly members wouldn't have a chance to attend those well-attended meetings at the school district board meetings dealing with the hearings on the bond? There were quite a few people I could see by the newscast were attending those meetings, and unfortunately very few people were attending the budget hearings regarding to Anchorage. So, we're not talking about rebuilding the school. We're talking about simply changing a situation, changing a meeting date. And what that is telling the public is this, and I've received communications from staff who have been hearing my comments out there from Young's office. They're hearing those words out there when I speak at the microphone at assembly meetings. And the end result is what you're telling the public and Young staff and others is we can't change the situation. It's impossible. Well, this is a simple issue. Go back to the Monday date for the school board meetings. And the assembly, keep their date they've had for years. And I'd like to remind you is the assembly has Tuesdays. They're not just regular meetings. They have alternate Tuesdays they have. And I think one's coming up next Tuesday for a special meeting. And there were other times they had special meetings. So Tuesdays are not a realistic direction. Change it now, because the longer you do this, the frustration, just in closing, the frustration that's going to happen Monday at Mirror Lake School, part of that's coming is frustration and not knowing what's going on, not being fairly connected. And now it's not going to be a town hall meeting. It's going to be a cell job without the public to be able to say what they think. Thank you. With 3 seconds to spare.
Thank you. Okay, no other discussions. Our next schedule of upcoming joint meeting is March 6th at City Hall. Ms. Mitchell? At City Hall next time. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.